A couple weeks or months ago, I was talking in a bar with a friend about horror films, and I let slip that I generally considered Hellraiser to be a queer film. And they said, well, sure, there is some BDSM subtext and some imagery relating to the queer experience, but for them, they didn't really think that it was. It didn't feel queer to them, which started me thinking, what exactly about Hellraiser feels so gay to me? And I didn't really have a good answer then. It's just a feeling. It's the way the movies deal with the conflict between the desires that you should feel versus those which you actually feel. How you can never go back once you open that door. And how liberating it feels to realize that your desires themselves aren't the problem. Instead, it's the damage you can do to other people with them. Both the way that Julia embraces her appetites and the way Kirsty defends herself felt empowering and liberating. And that was what I was hoping for, but ultimately didn't get in the new one. I wanted to like it, but I just can't. I couldn't pull a Valerian in the City of a Thousand Planets this time. I just don't have the energy anymore.
I can't pull an Alien Covenant this time.
Hellraiser dropped with little fanfare onto Hulu last October. Although it didn't make a lot of waves, it was pretty well received by those who saw it. Will there be any more movies in the franchise? Maybe, I don't know. No news since then. But since Hellraiser is back in the hands of competent filmmakers, it's time to take a more critical look at this new entry and decide if it measures up to the first two films. Let's ask ourselves a question. Do we need any more Hellraisers? Do we need any more than just those first two basically perfect movies? I'm not sure about that anymore after watching this. Even though I really, really wanted to like it, I just didn't.
Oh, thank God we're in agreement on that. I thought I was going insane hearing the 6 people that watched this say that it was some kind of return to form that saved the series. All I could really think after seeing it was, well, there's another one to throw on the pile. As disposable and lifeless as the last 7 or 8 of these. I wanted to like it, and was disappointed when I also didn't. Let's take this journey together and see if we can find some answers.
It's clear from the very first scene that the director and the writers are calling back very directly to the first 2 films, while also reinterpreting the lore. They're not just regurgitating it. We meet a random dude at a mysterious rich person sex party who is only revealed via newspaper cutouts an hour later to be a sex worker. Would like to know that. Whatever. He is lured by a mysterious older European woman to meet the mysterious host of the millionaire's sex party, Mr. Voight. Voight invites him to solve the mysterious puzzle. It's kind of a box, but not really anymore.
Mysteriously.
Honestly disappointed that the Eastern European woman didn't seduce him. Or the Voight guy didn't seduce him. They just stand around and talk. No sensuality at all.
Doesn't anyone fuck anymore?
Unlike last time, the Lament configuration sex box pricks you after you solve it and it takes your blood. Sex worker boy is ripped apart by chains and hooks, after which his blood is absorbed. Voight prays to the geometrical god from Hellraiser 2 for a boon. In this movie, turns out every time you solve the box, the configuration, it demands blood, and once you solve enough configurations, it grants you a gift from geometrical god. Which, isn't a bad idea.
The shape dimension. It's certainly better than the Lament configuration being a fucking Flash game, or a tunnel to the Jacob's Ladder but lame dimension.
Although all of this feels like it should be moving in the right direction, I felt that there was something missing. Over and over again, the movie focuses more on the violence and pain of the Cenobites over the sensuality and pleasure that they promise. There was always a delicate balance between the two in the past. When the sequels lost the plot, it was more laughable than anything because it was just so far off from the formula. It didn't feel insulting, it was just stupid. But here, when you can see just how close they got to the good stuff, it feels somehow worse. Compare this to Hellraiser 3, a somewhat okay sequel that misses the point, but also kind of doesn't miss the point. It's actually kind of better than this movie in some ways. Sorry. There you see the evil club owner. He gets the pinhead pillar, long story, and he has sex with random girl that he gives a rose to after in front of the statue, and then he feeds her to the statue. The point there is much clearer. The sequence is much more precise. You see that the club owner is much more interested in his own pleasure than hers. She's just an object to him, and he throws her out afterwards, practically. So when she's consumed by the pinhead pillar, we see that idea reflected literally. She's just flesh to both of them.
You enjoyed the girl.
Yes.
Good. So did I.
Here, Joey, I think that's his name, I had to look it up on IMDb, is just told to go to a room. He just picks up a puzzle, and he's just killed. You remember that famous scene in Star Wars where Han and Leia flirt, and Han says, "Hey, pick up that cup," and she does? Wasn't that hot? He's killed for basically just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's pointless.
Part of what made the original such an interesting idea was that Frank sought out the box because he was such an adrenaline junkie for new experiences. He thought he was the most hardcore guy out there, and then for his own satisfaction went after this massive escalation, only to realize he wasn't nearly as hardcore as these guys and wanted to go home. It was his own fault he ended up here. He wasn't a hapless random victim. The Cenobites offer what is, at least according to them, a good time. Nobody's getting off on the violence here, and it's disappointing.
Mm-hmm. I get that it's Hellraiser, but I feel like the violence should be much less gratuitous. You just feel bad for the guy without knowing why he would be interested in solving the puzzle in the first place. A good way of putting it, which we will come back to later, is that Hellraiser is sexual, but not sexy. The plot begins properly with Riley, a recovering drug addict. She's hooking up with another patient from the recovery group that she dropped out of, and is living with her brother, who is gay, and that's his entire personality. I wanted this movie to be gayer.
It's not gay enough.
They also live with...
This is the straightest movie to feature two gay guys. There's nothing fun about them.
They're gay, but they're not gay.
They're a straight guy's idea of gay.
Basically. They also live with a roommate whose entire personality is that she's the roommate. He's concerned for her, and he tries to put her on the right path. Based on a tip from her boy toy, they break into the storage space of the rich guy from the beginning of the movie, and they find the box that's sometimes not a box. Frustrated, Riley relapses on drugs, unspecified drugs, fights with her brother, and then runs out into a park. In the only honestly really good scene in the movie, Riley opens up the puzzle box while high, and then her brother shows up to apologize. In the fight between them, he accidentally pricks himself on the box and is sucked into turbo hell, but less gay than it should be. After that, we start what is honestly my least favorite plot in all of these sequel reboot things, which is main character investigating the lore that we already know from the previous movies.
It's not as bad as it has been, but it's still not great. Can't you figure out another way to work in exposition without having our characters Google search the plot of the movie that we already know? You can't just ask Pinhead either, because this Pinhead is so much more of an ethereal mystic figure, unlike the OG Pinhead, who's a bit more of a cut-to-the-chase kind of guy. She's more of a high priest than an evil crime boss. Pinhead is a witness, not a commander this time. She's got more in common with evil Julia in Parte 2.
But this is what you wanted. This is what you wanted to see. This is what you wanted to know. And here it is. Leviathan.
Our God awaits. You know what it can offer.
Riley and her friends investigate the box and the forgettable rich guy, eventually leading up to a confrontation between them, the demons, and the rich guy at his puzzle box mansion. Some people are killed and sucked into hell along the way, including Eastern European lady.
Mysterious Eastern European.
Mysteriously!
Before I talk about why this movie didn't work, I do have to admit that there's a lot of really stunning craftsmanship here. Although the Cenobite designs do go too far into grotesque monsters that are no longer human, they look great. The kills are grotesque in a way that they never were in the past. And I really love the way Cenobite Turbo Hell slowly drags people away from reality, blending the real with visions and monsters that only you can see, while leaving little remnants here and there in the real world, is a really unique flavor of horror. We complained a lot in the Hellraiser sequels about those cutaway sequences where the main character sees something spooky and then it cuts back to normality and turns out it wasn't even there. Imagine instead of that, if you see something that nobody else does, as you're being slowly sucked into a dimension that only you can see, full of things that are going to kill you. It's pretty haunting. The actors are universally good, but I do wish there was a more memorable score, however. But the direction, the visual design, and the atmosphere are all top-notch. The problem, unfortunately, lies in the story itself. The twist on the franchise that Hellraiser introduces is a simple and quite intriguing metaphor that unfortunately destroys the entire point of the franchise. Riley is a recovering kind of drug addict, and the cube she comes into possession with demands blood in exchange for the gifts and pleasures that it promises. But those gifts are never really what they promise to be. They're always the worst versions of that. It's a pretty direct metaphor. Riley drags the people around her, her brother for example, with her into this spiral as she rebounds into drug use before ultimately realizing where this path is going to lead and changing course. Except all of this is not really addressed very much, just kind of a little bit at the end.
It's a little disappointing that the creative team behind The Night House, a movie which expertly blends a drama about grief, loss, and depression with horror elements, did not manage to bring that same balance of elements to this project.
I would have liked to see more integration of this theme and the psychology of her addiction into these kills. Instead, the kills just start happening to unrelated people after they get pricked. They don't feel very well integrated into the plot. The worst example of this is when the roommate, who exists, mentions that she believes in God, she's praying for salvation. Just as she's being murder hooked, we learned this about her. Couldn't we have done that earlier? Of course, even in the original film, there were cases where random people were killed off for no reason. But there, it wasn't the Cenobites, it was Julia and Frank who were killing them off. The Cenobites need a reason to kill. They need your consent. They feed on your desire. Now, of course, that desire can be reflected or deflected onto others. And I thought the most interesting example of that was where Kirsty bargains with Pinhead to spare her soul in exchange for 5 other souls in the one with the guy from the what was it, the Geico commercials?
Yeah, remember? It was Mayhem.
Mayhem.
Yeah.
Those commercials. Yeah, that guy. I don't remember commercials. In my interpretation, Pinhead said yes to the deal because he wanted to see if Kirsty could actually find it inside herself to kill. A person who had entirely up to that point denied every single dark impulse within her. So you could pull off this plot of addiction and drawing people down with you if you integrated it better. As it goes on, the movie started leaving more and more of a bad taste in my mouth. Without a theme or a concept to tie together the kills, it just started to feel mean-spirited and gross. I don't want to see all these people dying for no reason. I don't want to see them suffering. It feels wrong, ugly, and exploitative. If this is the case, why do we watch horror films anyways? Isn't there something inherently grotesque and voyeuristic about watching movies where other people suffer and die in front of us? Sure, that might be a part of it, but I think there's more.
Cabin in the Woods is a decent exercise in asking this question. As a horror movie about watching horror movies, it asks its audience why they enjoy this violence, this suffering put on screen for our pleasure. If the ending is to be believed, we're a bunch of eldritch gods who feed off of their suffering, their blood, for our pleasure.
But even in that cynical version of this, there's one interesting detail that I think they miss in this movie. Early on, our main characters enter into the basement of the horror movie cabin, and they look at all the scary horror movie objects. They have to pick one of the horror movie objects in order to decide what kind of horror movie horror they will face. In the words of the game makers, the directors or producers, if they don't transgress, they can't be punished. Although some of that movie is making fun of horror tropes, I think there's some truth there. Whether they use it in a problematic way, or less so, like in the early Hellraiser movies, the idea here is that the audience doesn't want to see a bunch of people killed for no reason. I certainly don't. There are some kills that are too personal that I just can't watch. Everybody has their own limits, but I usually only tolerate particularly violent movies when I feel that there's some kind of point to the violence. That it's not too much or it doesn't go too far. There has to be a feeling that the violence is somewhat deserved or justified by the story, or if it isn't any of those things, that there's some revenge on the part of our heroes that's coming.
Long and short of it is, you like watching assholes getting killed for being assholes in these types of movies. And if they're not assholes, you want to see them get avenged by whichever character makes it out alive, so there's some sense of justice. Torturing and slaying people who really don't deserve it and then not giving the audience that catharsis just makes this shit kind of unpleasant.
You know, you could say that the way we interact with horror movies is deeply moralistic. That we love to see violence done to those who deserve it, and to see those saved who are innocent. But I think it's more than that, at least with this series. I think it's more that horror movies provide a safe space for us to interact with and engage with ideas and concepts that really scare us. That we're much more vulnerable than we thought we are. That our place in society is arbitrary and could change at any time. That our deepest and darkest desires could lead us down darker paths. And when a character finds their way out of that, that feels very empowering. That we can survive these fears and find our way out of them. What upsets me so much about the kills in Hellraiser is the feeling that these deaths don't have anything to do with the fear that the movie is engaged with. That these deaths happen to people for no reason, not even for their association with the main character, just because they were pricked by the box. I don't necessarily want to feel that these deaths are deserved so much as they exist to tell a story. So all these deaths are just that, deaths.
Just random, senseless gore without a point. Without any kind of thematic weight or at least any sense of fun to them. It's fun when Jason Voorhees cryogenically freezes someone's head and smashes it against a workbench. It's fun when Chucky the Living Doll puts nails in an airbag and launches them at someone in the back of a van.
Speak for yourself.
Maybe it's not fun when Michael Myers kills people because he's not creative and silly with it, but we get a kick out of seeing Laurie Strode escape from his clutches and kick his ass.
The ending tries to tie all this together when Riley realizes that her boy-toy boyfriend was actually working with the evil, boring rich guy, and thus was a toxic influence on her. She sacrifices him to the god, instead of her brother's boyfriend to the god, and faces down Pinhead only to turn down her promised gifts. She says that she has to face her pain instead of avoiding it, and that she has to accept that she has killed and hurt people around her instead of avoiding that as well. That instead of looking away, she accepts all of this damage. It would have been a much more cathartic moment if the story had built up to it more instead of leaving all of that to the last minute. It just feels hollow and forced instead of earned.
It's like when a Family Guy episode tries to force a lesson at the last minute of an episode, and even they know it's bullshit that doesn't connect much with the random events that just happened. But it's a sitcom, so you gotta have them make some kind of realization at the end, only for them to forget it next week.
So one last thing that I want to gripe about with this movie is how sexless it is. Now, sure, there are several people lying naked in bed next to each other, and there are multiple sex scenes, but it's entirely devoid of eroticism. There's no desire, no enticement. For a movie all about wanting something, this movie has the sex drive of an average teenager taking antidepressants.
Just jacking it to get it over with so I can go to sleep for the night. Man, fuck this.
There's no desire, there's no wanting. Even the evil rich weirdo who wants ultimate sensation isn't much of a sensualist. He just stands around the whole movie.
What a boring nothing of a character. I actually forgot what that guy looked like a week after we watched this movie. I remember his role in the story and what he does, but his appearance just completely left my mind. Let me tell you, I still remember the scary doctor from Part 2 who gets a big fan blade tentacle shoved into his head. Now that's a villain!
We do love him. There's no wanting sex, there's people having it joylessly. It just feels wrong building an installment of the series that's all about desire, having as much eroticism as a fucking Marvel movie. This goes down to the creature design for the Cenobites as well. Although they do look great, they look a bit too far gone for me from the BDSM look of the original movies. Look at these creatures. Do you honestly think these creatures fuck? Do they even have genitalia?
Where's the leather? Where's the nipple clamps and genital piercings? These designs suck. I hated them the second I saw them. It's sad when fucking Rick and Morty has a better grasp on the Cenobite aesthetic than an official Hellraiser movie. They're okay as monsters in any other movie, but they're not good Cenobites. They just miss the point too much.
It's honestly frustrating. I don't want to be so mean to this movie because, unlike almost every other Hellraiser sequel, it tries. It gets closer than any other entry in the series has since the third, and it doesn't try to repeat those old movies either. It's clearly trying to evolve the franchise in new and interesting directions.
Bigger quotes around interesting.
It just doesn't work. The problem is that Hellraiser is such a delicate balance of specific elements that it's very easy to get it wrong.
And paradoxically, because it gets closer than almost any other movie has, it feels more disappointing that it didn't get close enough.
So, let's answer that question we asked earlier. Do we actually need any more Hellraiser movies? After watching this one, I'm not so sure anymore.
Do we need more Hellraiser sequels? Well, any story can be interesting if it's told well, and a few of the classic 80s horror franchises have found a way to keep themselves alive by reinventing their original ideas, trying new things, subverting their own tropes, or just trying to get more meta and weird as they go. And it's never always a hit, but they at the very least tried stuff to keep us interested. Hellraiser seems to just keep spinning its wheels, trying to recapture a theme that they succeeded at twice, and never again. They can't grow the franchise because they can't seem to get the basics right ever again, and it's embarrassing how many times they've failed. If they can't figure out what the movies are even supposed to be like to be unique, then they can't do any more growing or evolving. We're still just trying and failing to understand Clive Barker's homework from decades ago. At least the casting for Pinhead was on point. Keep her around for the next one, she nailed it. Nice job, Sense8 lady.